The King's Gambit. This is one of the oldest and most aggressive white opening. This is one of those openings where your opponents they don't play against it as often. So once you play it, it will surprise them. If they take on f4, you just go knight f3, move the pawn to d4, and you have a big center. Most of the opponents that you play, they're gonna play pawn d6, declining the gambit, but it already gives them a bad bishop. And all we're going to do from here is develop our pieces, start our attack. I'm going to be showing you all the opening moves, all the tactical ideas, the middle game plans. You don't even have to worry about end games because most people that I play in this series, they didn't even survive past 20 moves. And I'm talking about players over 1500. So if you watch the full video, apply what I teach, your ratings will go through the roof. Kicking things off in the 500 region. Today, I'm going to be teaching you guys the King's Gambit. It's very aggressive. After pawn to e5, we're going to play the move pawn to f4, sacrificing a pawn that is on the same line as my king. And it's actually crazy because pawn to d5, this is actually called the fat bear counter gambit, where they're countering the King's Gambit with a gambit. And this guy's 500, so this is going to be very interesting. Now, I'm just going to take the pawn. If he takes with the queen, it allows my knight to develop with tempo. Usually the correct move in this position is to move the pawn to e4, so that way it's hard for my knight to go to f3, but he doesn't know that. So he took with the queen, let's develop the knight, hit the queen, and just like that, we have a little lead in development. From here, our goal is to have this guy moving the same piece, which is the queen, over and over and over. So he made another queen move. We now take on e5. Why? We want him to continue moving the queen. And yes, he takes on e5. Yes, the king is in check, but he's just helping me to develop my pieces. I have two pieces developed. All he has to show is a queen, which is in the center of the board, which he will be forced to move again. He plays knight f6. Now we go knight f3. We have three pieces developed. He has to move his queen yet again. And then after that, we're just going to get our king out the center of the board and then start our attack with our massive lead in development. He moves the queen out the way. Let me get my king out the center of the board, and I'm assuming he's preparing to get his king out the center of the board. Yo, guy played pawn to h6. This is called an unnecessary pawn move, by the way. And you guys know the drill. If your king is out the center and the opponent's king is still stuck in the center, what should we do? We should open the center. The center is already open because we played the king's gambit. Now, I'm trying to get my rook on e1 with check. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to willingly play the move bishop to b5 check, knowing that he's able to just play c6 and chase away my bishop. But my whole idea is to ensure that I'm able to continue some attack on the e file. So he blocks with the bishop, which is even better for me actually. Let's go rook to e1, checking the king, and this is the start of our attack. He decides to block with the bishop, and that's when we're not going to take just yet. Here's what I'm going to do. The bishop is pinned, right? We're going to play queen to e2, TP on the PP. We must put pressure on a pin piece. Whenever you're pinning a piece, try to attack that piece as many times. Because already it's very hard for him to figure out what to do. Like, I think he needs to castle, but then if he castles, I'm just going to take this bishop, then take this bishop. And I'm not afraid of the rook coming over to e8 because I'm just going to move my queen out the way. So, oh, he decides to play knight c6. He's developing his knight and protecting his bishop at the same time. But because I have two attackers on e7 and he has two defenders on e7, how should I be thinking now? If you're attacking someone and they're defending against your attack, you should be thinking about removing the guard. No, we got rid of the knight, which means he's now just not able to take my bishop. Because if he takes my bishop, he gets mated in 11 moves. Oh, that's... Well, I was about to say that's such a nice move because he checks the king first, protects the bishop. But luckily, I'm able to play the move pawn to d4, which hits the queen, which means the queen is still not able to take my bishop due to the mate. It would be like a drawback mate. So he still has to use the queen to guard the mate. And I'm going to be menacing that queen. It's the same thought process. I'm trying to take his bishop on e7 and say checkmate. The queen is the piece that is preventing me from checkmating, which means I'm going to try everything in my power to remove the guard, which is the queen. So queen to d6 was played, and what do we do here? Do we just move away our bishop? Nah. We're trying to checkmate on e7. With that being said, I'm going to develop my bishop, put my bishop on the f4 square, and attack his queen. And yes, both of my bishops are hanging, but he's not able to take this bishop because that's going to be a drawback blunder. And he's not able to take this bishop because that's going to be a drawback blunder. The only square, okay, yeah, that was also a move. I thought he had to put his queen on b4, but queen to e7 is also completely fine. Now, I don't want to trade the queens, even though I'm ahead by a piece. So first, I'm going to take on d7 with check. I'm assuming he's going to take with the knight. And then I'm going to move my queen out the way. And the moment I move my queen out the way, his queen is going to still be under attack. So ensure that you trade when you're ahead in material. And even if you trade queens in this position, that's fine. But don't be overcomplicating the game when you're ahead in material. I'm choosing to keep the queens on the board here because his king is still in the center of the board and I'm attacking him. Okay, no, guy played king to f8. Bro, come on. That's a queen. Well, he resigns. Two more King's Gambit against 600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 600. And again, I'm going to be teaching you guys the King's Gambit, which is pawn to f4. Like, people usually just don't see this a lot. Knight c6, whenever they guard the pawn in any way, just develop your knight and apply as much pressure as possible to their e5 pawn. Pawn d6, he keeps on guarding the pawn. Let's just go bishop c4 here. Usually in the King's Gambit, the f7 pawn or just the f file becomes very, very weak. He plays knight to f6, attacking my pawn on e4. Let's just play pawn d3, guarding the pawn. The plan is just to get my king out the center of the board and start our own attack on his king. Okay, pawn to, that cannot be a good move. Like, he plays pawn to d6, then he plays pawn to d5. Not only is he making unnecessary pawn moves, he's also wasting time. And his pawn on e5 is only being guarded once. I'm attacking it twice. Let's just take on d5 first. Let's take on d5 first and say, I'm attacking his knight. And then once he takes on d5, then we take on e5 and we're just ahead by a pawn. Bishop to g4. He's pinning my knight to my queen, which means my pawn on e5 could be vulnerable. With that being said, okay, I was thinking about playing d4. D4 takes. You know, let me just get the king out the center of the board. I'm just going to castle my king because if he, that's what I was expecting. If he takes on e5, because his king is in the center of the board, I should be able to just move my queen out the way, which means my queen is no longer pinned. His knight on e5 is pinned. He develops his bishop to guard the knight, but I was already applying pressure to the pinned knight, bro. And you developing your bishop to d6 also blundered your knight on d5. So the guy's just blundering pieces left and right. Let's just take on e5 though. But you know, like, his bishop on g4 is unprotected. His pawn on f7 is under attack twice. His knight on d5 is unprotected. He decides to just ignore everything and get his king out the center of the board, which means the knight on d5 is unprotected and free. The bishop on g4 is unprotected and free. Let's just take the okay, maybe I should have took his bishop because now he's able to play bishop to c5 check and then take my bishop. But the good thing is, now he decides to play the move rook to e8. The rook is no longer guarding f7. That's a drawback blunder, bro. Which means now I have three attackers on f7. Bishop takes f7 check is just a fork, and I'm just winning the game. Let's just take on f7 check. The king now has to move to h8. Yo, guy played king to f8. He puts his king on the same line as my rook. Can I checkmate here? Okay, guys, whenever you see a good move, always look for a better one. We know this. So instead of saying take the free rook, king has to take, and then we take, and that's also winning. Why not just move the bishop out the way and say check? Oh my God, there's king here. There's actually king here. I should have moved the bishop to d5 so that way when he plays king there, then I'm able to checkmate on f7. Oh my lord, that's embarrassing. Okay, what if I still do it? If I check on f7, the king takes on e6, and I just have nothing. That's fine. Let's just take the free bishop. It still come. No, bishop to g5 would have won the queen. Yeah, my opponent was playing a bit too badly. Well, he resigns. But more King's Gambit against 700 rated players. Stick around. Opponent is now 700. Let's show you some more King's Gambit. Yo, we have people accepting the gambit. Remember, whenever they accept the gambit, just play knight to f3, defend against this queen coming to h4. Now that he plays knight to f6, it gets very interesting because now I'm able to just play e5 and chase away his knight. Yeah, let's just play e5. Pawn to e5 just chases away his knight. Now it's just weird for black. Where's he going to put the knight? Usually, knight to h5 is most dangerous because it guards the pawn on f5. He decides to put the knight in the center of the board, but I'm just going to continue with my attack here. Let's just go pawn to c4. Let's just keep forcing that knight to move over and over. Then he plays knight to e7, and then we play pawn to d4. And again, if you guys look on my position, I have a big center. And that's one of the whole points of the King's Gambit. The attack is going to be very easy for me here. Pawn to d5 was played. I do have the option of en passant, but I really don't have to react to it. Because remember, to take is a mistake. If we take on d6, I'm helping his queen. If I take on d5, I'm helping his knight. So with that being said, let's just ignore what's happening. Just take back our pawn and just focus on our development here. Bishop f5, okay, he's developing. Let's continue with our development. Let's go knight c3, apply some pressure to his pawn on d5, and I'm like 1, 2, 3 moves away from being fully developed. It's gonna take him a while to fully develop his pieces. Pawn c6 was played. It's not a bad move. Let's go bishop to d3 here. I'm just trying to trade this bishop off the board because that seems to be his best piece. And then after takes, it's gonna be helping my queen. He did not take. He played knight d7. Do I have anything here? I do have something. I think his knight on e7 is overworked. Like, if you look on the position, the knight is guarding both the bishop on f5 and being a defender of d5. So what if I choose to take on f5, which would distract his knight from guarding the d5 pawn? Now he only has one defender of the d5 pawn. I have two attackers of the d5 pawn, and just like that, we won ourselves a pawn. I need to get my king out the center of the board though, but that's gonna happen. Let's just take the pawn first. Queen to a5, check, attacking my king and the unprotected knight. Luckily, I'm able to just pull the knight back to c3. Everything is guarded. Bishop to b4 would be a dangerous move in this position because then he's developing and he's gaining tempo, and then he's going to be forcing me to play another defensive move to guard my knight. He played bishop to b4, but here's what we're going to do because we still know that offense is the best defense. Yes, I have to add additional defenders, but I'm going to choose to put the queen on the d3 square. Why, you may ask? Because I'm adding more defense to my knight, but I'm also attacking his knight on f5. Remember, even if you have to play a defensive move, try to make that defensive move as aggressive as possible. So he decides to pull the knight back to e7. And this is my cue to just get the king out the center of the board. He also decides to castle his king. But now we're going to start our attack. Now, one thing that you guys need to keep in mind, that when it comes to attacking someone's king, we should aim to attack the pawns and the square around the king. And that's why I'm going to play the move knight to g5. I'm threatening a checkmate on h7, but this is not me playing hope chess. I'm not hoping that he misses the fact that I'm threatening the pawn on h7. I want him to move a pawn that is around this king, and he just did, which means the dark squares around this king are now weakened. And because the dark squares around this king are now weakened, I'm going to hit him with knight to e4. Now, this knight can now target the dark squares, and that was actually a bad move. Queen to h3 would have completely won the game because I would have been threatening a checkmate and attacking the knight. I got way ahead of myself. But after knight to f5, I'm still going to play queen to h3 and threaten the mate. The only thing is, the knight on f5 prevents me from taking this knight, but he still has to defend against the mate, assuming he's going to play a move like pawn to h5 or even pawn to h6 is playable. Okay, he deserved to lose that knight because he took a free pawn, blundering the knight, but we're not going to take the knight because that's just checkmate. More King's Gambit against 800 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 800. We're still beating people with the King's Gambit. E5, we play f4, and this is the King's Gambit. You're going to be seeing moves like pawn to d6 or knight to f6, like most of the time, because people don't really face the King's Gambit. their first reaction is not to accept the gambit. So I'm happy that someone accepted the gambit this early. Now, once they accept the gambit, please look out for this diagonal that you exposed on your king. So this move knight to f3 is crucial. It's important. And after knight c6, the whole point was to play pawn to d4, which means if they accept the king's gambit, we're going to have this massive center. And with a massive center, it's just going to be hard for him to do much with his knights because it's going to be easy for us to start chasing around the knights. And bishop to d6, that's his first mistake. This guy's being greedy, by the way, because he's trying to hold on to the pawn. But for one, we know that we don't want to be moving the same piece more than once in the opening. And he's also blocking out his central pawn on d6. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to play the move pawn to e5. I'm going to force him to move that bishop more than once in the opening. And once the bishop moves, I simply retrieve my pawn on f4. Now he plays pawn to b6. And my fellow viewers, it's about to get heated because remember what I told you guys about having this massive center. I need to develop my bishop. I need to develop my knight. But he was the one who started breaking principles first. So I'm going to play pawn to d5. And this is not an unnecessary pawn move. Yes, I'm moving the pawn more than once, but I'm forcing him to move the knight more than once. And I'm the one who's getting the space advantage. And then once the knight goes to b4, we just need to double check that he's not threatening anything. And okay, I'm thinking about hitting him with pawn to d6, takes, the bishop goes to f6. Yeah, let's do that. Let's hit him with pawn to d6. Because after takes, he has to put the bishop on f6. And the bishop on f6 is pretty active, by the way. But my pawn on d6 is just going to be so strong. Okay. I don't know if he thought his bishop was trapped or anything, but I mean, we're playing against 800 rated people, so it's it's not the time to bully anyone, you know? He blundered his bishop. We took the free bishop. Now we're attacking the free knight. Okay, he didn't hung his knight. He saw that. Now I need to finish my development as quickly as possible. Let's go knight c3. And by the way, we do not allow pieces on our half of the board, but I just know that the knight doesn't do anything on b4. Now he plays bishop to b7. Now I'm going to play pawn to a6, just chasing away the knight so that way I could comfortably develop my pieces. Okay, he moves the knight. Let's go bishop to c4, targeting the weak f7 pawn. I'm going to easily get my king out the center of the board. Queen to f6. Looks like he's trying to castle his king on the queen side, but that's fine. Wait, do we play knight e4 and attack his queen? Knight d5, he's going to be able to take my bishop. If I castle, he's going to castle. I actually don't want him to get castled. That's the thing. Yeah, we don't want him to get castled. Let's go knight e4. Let's try to get some initiative, which means if he castles his king, he's going to be losing his queen. So he's now forced to move the queen again, and I don't care if he takes on b2. That pawn is poisoned. If he takes my pawn on b2, then the queen would have been trapped with rook b1. So he plays queen to g6, hitting the unprotected pawn, hitting the unprotected knight. But we don't care about the pawn. We're just going to get working out the center of the board because his king is still in the center. So if he takes my knight, the queen and the king is going to be on the same line, and I'm going to hit him with rook to e1, which he did. Okay, I'm also thinking of sacrificing my bishop, and then after king takes, knight g5 fork. But if I sacrifice my bishop, he actually has the option of just not taking the bishop. So let's just go rook to e1. We pin the queen, we win the queen, we win the game. Okay, he sacked the queen. Let's just take with check. King to d8 is not what I think he's gonna do. And then I'm definitely looking for ways to checkmate him on the dark squares. Okay, he didn't play king to d8. He decides to block with the knight. So to continue my attack, I'm noticing his f7 pawn is weak. So I'm going to play the move knight to, let's go knight to g5. Now I have two pieces attacking f7. He only has his king guarding f7. Oh, he decides to play the move knight h6 defending the pawn, but that's a drawback blunder. The knight no longer guards the knight on e7, which means that's just a checkmate. More King's Gambit against 900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 900. Let's play some King's Gambit. And after e5, we're going to play f4. Now, knight c6 was played. Again, any move they play to defend the pawn, just play knight f3. Apply more pressure to the pawn. And Once they keep on defending the pawn, then the bishop goes to c4. And then from here, it's normal development. They're going to be having issues on the f file, and it's going to be very easy for us to develop our pieces. Knight f6 was played to attack the pawn. I'm just going to play pawn to d3 in order to guard it. So he develops the bishop. Looks like he's planning on castling his king. Let me just get my king out the center of the board. He also got his king out the center of the board, and now I'll develop my knight. So the goal is just to develop our pieces, be as principled as we possibly can. Bishop e6 was played, not a bad move. He's trying to develop the bishop, but now I have a very interesting move, and that's pawn to f5. I attack the bishop, which means I'm gaining space on the king side. And if he decides to take my bishop, I'm going to take, and he's not going to be able to play d5. So he took, let's take back. It's impossible for him to play d5. He's not able to play knight d4, which means the whole entire game could just be me attacking his king. Okay, rook to e8 was played. It's a decent move. I'm going to start by playing the move king to h8. Like, you should never feel comfortable when there's a diagonal or any file or any rank is exposing, pointing towards the king. And then he pulls the bishop back to f8. A move that I don't really understand, but let's just develop my bishop. Now I'm actually able to pin his knight to the queen. And funny enough, it's actually best for his bishop to be on e7. Pawn h6, we pull the bishop back, maintaining the pin on the knight, which means sooner or later, he's going to be forced to put the bishop back on e7. He did put the bishop back on e7. And let's just play the move. Oh, if I play queen d2, there's knight takes e4. I have to be very careful. Knight e4, bishop takes, queen takes. Yeah, that's actually very risky. So I'm going to play the move queen to e1. So that way my bishop is guarded. Like, I'm not sure if he was going to find it, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Queen d7, no, I play rook to d1, which means all my pieces are now active. Like every single piece that I have on the chessboard, you could say they're doing something. Knight h7 is actually not a bad move because he's trying to exchange the attacking pieces. I'm not going to do that though. In fact, I'm going to play pawn to g4. This is me starting my attack. And I want you guys to keep in mind that we do not want to be pushing pawns on the side that our king is on. But in this particular position, my king is extremely safe. And it's just not possible for any of his pieces to move close to my king. It's very easy for my pieces to move close to his king. He took. No, I'm just going to take with the queen. And the plan from here is to put my queen on the g file, put my rook on the g file, then move the pawn forward, open the g file, and that's how we're going to be attacking his king. So as we said, we're not going to be trading queens. Like, nothing is wrong with trading queens, but if you're the one attacking, don't be trading any pieces off the board. So the plan was to put the queen and the rook on the g file, so that way we're able to be advancing the pawns on the king side. In addition to that, this queen is not necessarily on the best square because it's very easy for me. For example, after he plays a move like knight g5, well, I was thinking about playing knight d5 hit the queen, but then once the queen moves, oh, it's actually fine. Knight d5 hits the queen. I was actually worried about him attacking my pawn on e4, but I'm just going to take the knight on g5, and if he takes with the queen, pawn h4, and there's just too many attacks on his king, especially if he allows me to play f6. Like, if he allows me to move my pawn to f6 and attack him that way, then it's going to be even worse. So he moves the queen out the way, which means he don't mind recapturing with the pawn. Here's what we're going to be doing. First, we're going to be taking on g5, so that way once he recaptures with the pawn, his king is very weak. And then once he takes, that's when we play pawn to f6. And obviously, we're not expecting him to take because that's just going to be a royal fork and we're just winning the game. But the whole idea is to get him to be moving pawns on the side that his king is on. For example, if he moves this pawn any way at all, then it's just lost and he's just mated. So instead of capturing anything, he decides to move his queen to e6. But that was a drawback blunder because putting the queen on e6 no longer guards the c7 pawn, which means now I'm able to take on c7 and I'm forking both the rooks and the queen. I'm actually thinking I'm trying to see if there's any possible way to checkmate him though, because you guys know whenever you see a good move, you should be looking for a better one. I'm trying to play Queen H3, take the pawn, Rook to F6, Queen H6, and that should be leading to mate. But let's just take on C7. I'm most likely not going to be taking his Rook. Me taking on C7 is just to attack his queen because I think it's more important for me to save the knight because his king is just so weak. And I'm sure there's some checkmates here. Okay, queen takes c4. He grabbed the pawn. Both of his rooks are forward, so we don't necessarily have to rush to try to take the rook. What I need to be aware of is the fact that my pawn on e4 is hanging. So let's play the move rook to e1, guard this pawn. My plan from here, though, is to play queen h3, take the pawn, and then set up some checkmates on his king like that. Knight to d4, you see? The guy's very aggressive. Knight to d4 also attacks my knight. Because I'm going for his king, I'm going to pull the knight back to d5. This is just me saying my knight on being on d5 is stronger than having those rooks. So if I do not actually deliver a checkmate, then me keeping the knights on the board could be a mistake. But it can't be a mistake though, like his king is just too weak. Okay, funny enough, king to h7 makes it way easier for me to checkmate him because my whole entire plan was to play queen to h3. Now he allows me to play queen to h3 with check. He literally walked his king into a checkmate. I mean, the guy plays king g6, which means that's just checkmate. More king's gambit against 1000 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1000. Let's play the King's Gambit. After e5, we play f4, and we're likely going to be seeing knight c6 or pawn d6. Not a lot of persons accepts the gambit. Knight c6 was played, and we're just going to be playing knight f3, applying more pressure to the pawn on e5. More than likely, you're going to be seeing pawn to d6. Like, this is what they all do, block their bishop in, and then we just develop our pieces normally. On d6, we go bishop to c4. That's the whole idea. Now it's very easy for us to get our king out the center of the board, and development is easy. Knight to f6 was played, targeting my pawn on e4. Let's just play pawn to d3 here, guarding the pawn. This is something that I've been seeing a lot, by the way. Bishop to e7, and now I'm just going to get my king. Well, do we get the king out the center, or do we play knight c3? I don't think it matters. I'm going to start by playing knight c3 because if he chooses to castle his king now, I'm actually thinking of playing pawn to f5. Okay, he played the move bishop to g4, and whenever the bishop goes to g4, just immediately put the question to the bishop. Because pulling the bishop back is actually losing the bishop, and people will pull their bishop back. But if he takes on f3, it gives up the bishop for a knight, and then your queen is just very active. So we're never afraid of a move like this. Okay, he gave up the bishop. Let's take with the queen. Now, I want you guys to watch out for this move knight to d4. It's not dangerous, but remember, your queen is not the only piece that is under attack. c2 is also under attack, which is why I'm going to pull the queen back to f2, which saves my queen and it guards the pawn on c2. And then from here, it's very easy. Bishop e3 will apply more pressure to the knight, and I could also choose whether I want to castle on the king side or the queen side. Then he decides to castle his king. What I'm going to do now is go bishop to e3. I have two pieces attacking his knight. He only has one piece guarding his knight. And because he already castled his king and I haven't castled my king, I'm strongly considering castling my king on the queen side. So that way, launching my pawns towards his king becomes very easy for me to do. Okay, pawn to c5 makes some sense. He's cementing his knight on the d4 square. But let's just get our king out the center of the board. And this will be a very fun game because I'm going to be launching my pawns forward to attack his king. And I'm assuming he's going to be launching his pawns forward to attack my king. Pawn to a6, as we said, the pawns are coming. He should have played immediate b5, by the way. But hey, let's go for our attack. This is what a dynamic games look like. And we're both trying to do pawn storm, which means the person who is able to attack the quicker will win this game. Ah, this is not how you do it, bro. Do not, do not push pawns on the side that your king is on, especially if a pawn storm is coming. If a pawn storm is coming, let the storm come. And when the pawn contacts your pawn, then you move a pawn. What he just did, he created a hook in his position, which means I'm now able to play pawn to g5, and then all of a sudden, it's going to be creating all sorts of lines pointing towards his king. So he took the pawn. Now we take, and all of a sudden, I get the f5 pointing towards his king. The fact that my bishop is on the same diagonal as his king is even worse. Because now once he plays a move like knight h5, one move I'm thinking of is queen h5 to attack the knight, but then he has g6. With that being said, because my bishop is on the same diagonal as his king, I'm able to hit him with pawn to g6. This is me taking advantage of a pin piece. And I want you to notice I have one, two, three pieces attacking f7. He only has two pieces guarding. So if he doesn't want to lose the f7 pawn, he needs to add some defense. Pawn to b5. My guy's like, hey, offense is the best defense. But first of all, I could take, and if he sacks the rook, I go queen takes. But I'm actually thinking of just playing the. Let's just go bishop to d5 and attack his rook. Like, that's a free pawn. I'm not ready to take that pawn as yet. I'm trying to find a way to tap this knight or capture this knight. Because if I'm able to get my queen on the h7 square, then I'm just winning. So he moves his rook out the way. How do we do this? Okay, okay, okay. No, that doesn't work. Let's be a bit patient. Let's be a bit patient. Again, that's a dead pawn. I'm not seeing how he's going to guard it. Let's go knight e2 here. I'm trying to get my queen to attack this knight. So if he takes, I go queen takes. Otherwise, I'm just trying to get rid of this knight and then attack his knight. Because if a queen is on h7, that's mate. Okay, he took, which means once I take, his knight is now under attack. And maybe he thinks he has a fork on g3 and he's like, oh, shoot, bro just blundered a fork. But that's not a fork, bro. If he had played knight g3, then it would have lost the game very, very easily. Now that he plays knight to f6, he's actually attacking my bishop, so I have to be careful. So now will be the time where I take on f7 with check, assuming he's going to move his king. And the plan is still to get my queen on the h5. So the knight is the piece that is preventing me from delivering a checkmate, which means if he takes my bishop, that's removing the guard blunder. With that being said, why not just play a move like rook to f1? This is just removing the guard. I'm setting up a removing the guard tactic. The knight protects the h5 square. So if I'm able to get rid of this knight, then queen h5 is going to be a checkmate. Okay, guy does not care. He moves his queen to a5. My pawn on a2 is also protected. And my fellow viewers, this is when the game ends. The thing is, if I take his knight and he takes with the bishop, that's just a checkmate. If I take his knight and he takes with the pawn, queen h5 is not mate. He's going to be able to move his king to g7, but rook to g1 will be checkmate. So let's sacrifice the rook on f6. And now, what is he going to do? Well, he immediately took with the bishop, which means that's just checkmate. More King's Gambit against 1100 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1100. Let's go some King's Gambit. E5 was played. Let's go f4. And this is the whole idea. Okay, he declines the gambit, but whenever they decline the gambit, just develop your knight like normal. And what we're doing is we're applying a lot of pressure to the e5 pawn. He develops his knight to add some defense to the pawn, but now we're just going to play bishop c4, and we're now targeting this weak f7. He plays knight to f6, attacking my pawn on e4. Let's just play pawn to d3, guard the pawn. And now he plays h6 because he's trying to prevent my knight from going to the g5 square. But let's keep following principles. Our king is out the center of the board, and we have two of our pieces now developed. Bishop to g4. Okay, now my knight is pinned. I mean, this guy's playing some chess. I'm not going to lie. Because now he's trying to play the move knight to d4 to apply some pressure to my pinned knight. But here's what I'm going to do. Pawn c3. Not only am I defending against knight d4, but it also allows my queen to potentially move to b3 if I'm trying to add more attackers to the f7 pawn. Then he plays pawn to a6. Now, that's definitely a suspicious move. I guess he wants to play b5, but okay, how are we going to win this game? Let's just start by playing queen to b3. This is called a fork, by the way, because already we have a battery pointing towards his f7 pawn, which means we're attacking f7 twice, and we're also attacking his unprotected pawn on b7. Okay, he decides to play the move pawn to b5, which is very odd. He prefers to lose his f7 pawn with check than to lose his b7 pawn. No, he also lost the right to castle his king. Now that he plays king to e7, I have some ideas. Like if my queen was able to move to the e6 square, that would have been a checkmate. It's not going to happen though because his bishop is on g4. So I'm thinking about some removing the guard tactic. But first, I'm going to take on e5, to open the file for my rook, apply some pressure to his knight on f6. He took with the knight. I wasn't expecting him to take with the knight because now he's not able to attack my queen. So here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to trade the knights so that way this diagonal is also open, pointing towards his king. And then once he takes back, I'm going to hit him with pawn to h3. This is me trying to do a removing the guard tactic, but the only thing that is possible for him to do is to pull his bishop back anyway. So he's not going to be getting checkmated just yet. But this is like the weakest king. My lord, he moves the bishop to e2 to attack my rook, which means e6 is not guarded, which means 12 moves into the king's gambit. That's just checkmate. More King's Gambit against 1200 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1200. Let's play some King's Gambit. Pawn e5, we go pawn f4. That's the King's Gambit. And any move they play to protect the pawn, we just play knight to f3 and apply more pressure to the pawn on e5. Okay, bishop to d6. This is just him trying to guard the pawn. But this is not principled because you shouldn't be putting your minor pieces in front of your central pawns. No, he's going to have a lot of issues developing his light squared bishop. But hey, let's just continue with our natural development. Bishop c4 and I'm doing fine. So he decides to take the pawn on f4. Technically, you could say he accepts the king's gambit. Whenever they play moves like pawn takes d4, that's the perfect time to move the central pawn because now it's so hard for him to develop his knight on f6 because if he plays knight f6 pawn e5 is already a fork. And does that mean he's going to be forced to move the bishop more than once in the opening? Okay, knight a5, he attacks my bishop. And whenever you see these types of moves, if you don't have to pull the bishop back to d3, don't do it. Because knights don't belong on the edge of the board. So now I'm going to play the move bishop back to d3. I mean, yes, I had to move bishop, but now his knight is just stuck on the edge of the board. So he's ahead by a pawn, which is poison. It's very easy for me to win that pawn. But he has a knight on the edge of the board, and his bishop is in front of his central pawn. This is just going to be a very hard position for black. Pawn to c5 was played. Not sure why. I guess he's trying to attack my center. Now, already I'm able to take on c5, then take on f4, but I'm trying to ensure that I maintain the control of the center. So now I'm going to play the move pawn to c3, supporting this pawn chain that I have. Okay, pawn to c4 attacks the bishop. That's fine, by the way. I'm just going to pull my bishop back to c2. Eventually, once I play the move pawn to e5, my bishop is just going to be very strong on this diagonal. And at the end of the day, his knight is still on the edge of the board. Knight to e7, okay. Looks like a Greek gift sacrifice is coming up. Let me just calmly get my king out the center of the board. Very, very calmly. We're 9 moves into the king's gambit, by the way. Let's see what he's about to do. If he castles his king, it's GG's. Ha ha ha! My fellow viewers, he castled the king. It's GG's. Watch this. Moving the pawn to e5 attacks the bishop and it sets up a Greek gift sacrifice. What is even a Greek gift sacrifice? Well, biblically it's when you give someone something, but it's not really an actual gift. And that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna sacrifice my bishop on h7, and then once the king takes, thinking he's winning material, that's when the attack is gonna come. The knight joins the attack, the queen joins the attack. Bishop takes h7. So ensure that you use these ideas in your game. Just remember, it you do not want any minor piece that is able to capture your knight. when it moves to g5, and you don't want any minor pieces that is able to defend the h7 square. So king h7, let's go knight g5 check. If he pulls the king back to h8, then queen h5, and you could say it's game over. Usually the best way to try to defend against this is to play king to g6. But whenever they play king to g6, we're not going to be playing the move queen to g4, and there's just going to be all sorts of attacks on their king. So he did play king to g6. Again, don't panic whenever they play king to g6. All I'm going to do now is play queen to g4, which means I'm putting my queen on the same line as his king, which means the moment I move my knight out, okay, pawn to f5 is also not a bad move. Pawn to f5 is usually one of the main moves in the Greek gift sacrifice. Now, I'm considering to take on f6, and then after king takes f6, I fork on h7, but I'm trying to see if I'm able to deliver any checkmates. Like, for example, queen to h4 threatens queen h7, but if I play queen h4, then he has rook to h8. So still kind of weird. Well, this has to be winning. Let's just take en passant, because even if he plays king takes, I'm just going to take on f5, and there's just too many pieces that I have in the attack. And again, if I want to win his rook with knight h7, that's always going to be there. But because his king is on the run, we're definitely trying to checkmate his king here. Ah, pawn to d5. That's a very interesting try, because it's a discovered attack on my queen. Now, the move I'm thinking of here is knight e6 check. And then after knight e6 check, he's forced to take on f6. But how am I going to be checkmating him? Because if I take his queen, he takes my queen. All right, I have a little idea. I should be able to take his knight. And then if he takes my queen, I take his queen. But I'm going to start by playing the move queen to h4. So that way I can at least start to play the move queen h7 and pull his king in the middle of the board. With that being said, if he plays rook to h8, then I'm going to be forced to take his knight. And if he takes my rook, I take his queen. But I'm not trying to just regain my piece, though. Like, this is the Greek gift sacrifice. Like, we're going for mate. Yo, he found rook to h8. Okay, let's continue with the plan. There's no possible checks that I have on his king, so we have to take on e7. The good thing is, I'm at least getting back my piece. So obviously, if he takes the pawn, I'm just going to take his rook. So he has to take my queen. And then once he takes my queen, I take his queen, assuming he's going to take with the bishop. And then once he takes with the bishop, my knight is under attack. Surprisingly, his king is not checkmated, which is crazy. Maybe I did something wrong. But let's just pull the knight back to f3 and attack his rook. The rook is forced to move, and I'm going to be able to win his pawn on f4. And okay, black has a slight advantage now, but I'm sure there was a checkmate somewhere there. Okay, he pulls the rook all the way back to h8. And before I take on e5 on f4, let's play the move knight to e5 check. I'm still trying to hunt his king. Now, I'm not assuming that there's going to be any checkmate here, but he still needs to be careful. He moves the king. Let's grab the free pawn. Now we're only ahead by a pawn. But the plan is to ensure that I get all the pieces in the game. So before I do anything drastic, I need to get my knight on b1 in the game. I need to get my rook on a1 in the game. Every piece needs to be doing something. Okay, rook to f8. I guess he's trying to play g5. Not too concerned though. Let's just develop the knight. If he plays g5, I'm just going to move my bishop, and I'm ahead by a pawn. If he wants to trade, that's on him. Knight back to c6. That makes more sense. Just bringing the knight off the edge of the board in the center. Now I'm going to play the move rook a to e1. Now, as you guys can see, all my pieces are doing something. But because we're now in the end game, the plan changes a bit. It's no longer about attacking the guy's king. I'm now trying to attack his pawns. I'm now trying to create a pass pawn or queen one of my pawns. So he took on e5. Taking with the bishop is fine. But again, we're in the end game. I'm going to choose to take with the pawn, creating what is called a pass pawn, which means now my plan is actually to start rolling the pass pawn, which is why he played bishop to e6. Guys, playing some chess. Okay, now let's play pawn to b3. I'm trying to find some ways to get my knight in the game. He checks the king. Let's move the king out of the way. That's fine. Then he plays pawn a5. Okay, that's a slight inaccuracy because now I'm able to take on c4. It also opens the b file for my rook. But if he takes with the d pawn, it also allows my knight to get access to the e4 square. So there's two ways to do this. Play rook to b1, hit the bishop. Once the bishop move, we take, or play knight e4 and threaten knight to g5. Knight e4, there's bishop d8. So I'm going to start by playing the move rook to b1, hitting the bishop. And then once the bishop move, I may take the free pawn on b7, or I may just play knight e4, centralizing my knight. Okay, bishop c5 was played, which means that's just a free pawn. But whenever you see a good move, look for a better one. Knight e4 attacks the bishop, which means I'm still going to win the free pawn, but now I'm also threatening to win his bishop on e6, which means if he does not find the move bishop to e7, which he didn't find, he decided to guard his bishop. That's just a fork. That's GG's, bro. Because now he has to move the king. And then once he moves the king, we take the free bishop, and it's still going to be another fork. So he moves the king, we grab the bishop, forking his rook on the bishop. And then once the rook move, we grab the bishop, and then we win the game. This guy didn't play too badly, though. Like, he survived a Greek gift sacrifice, which is crazy. So he moves the rook. Whenever you see a good move, look for a better one. Instead of taking this bishop, he allows us to fork on c7. Now he's just losing an entire rook. So he moves the rook. Let's just grab the rook and then put our rook on this open file so that way his rook is not able to get to the open file. My plan from here is to find a way to queen my pawn, get my rooks on his seventh rank. He pulls the bishop back to f8. Let's just get to a rook on his seventh rank. Random pawn moves. Well, it's not really random. Let's play rook to c7, which means he's not able to move the b pawn because he's going to be losing his c pawn. Instead, he played rook to d8 because I gave him access to the d file. But his rook no longer guards the e file. So now I'm able to play pawn to e6, pushing my passed pawn, threatening a fork. He plays rook to d3, and once I play pawn to e7, he's forced to sacrifice his bishop. Otherwise, I'm just going to queen my pawn. So he sacked the bishop. We take the bishop. And then now that he takes this pawn, this should be checkmate in a few moves. Because here's what I'm going to do. I already have one rook on his seventh rank. All I'm going to do is play the move bishop to e5 and attack his rook. If he decides to move the rook, then taking on g7 is just going to be checkmate in two moves. He didn't move the rook. He didn't save the mate, which means we're going to take on g7 with check. The king has to go to h8, and that's going to be a checkmate. So let's take on g7. King now has to move, and that's just a checkmate. More King's Gambit against 1,300 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,300 more King's Gambit. Pawn e5, that's the King's Gambit. Everybody's declining the Gambit. Well, if they play d6, which is the most natural move, just play knight to f3 and apply more pressure. Bishop to c4, bishop g4 is interesting. Pins or knight, but that's fine. Let's just play bishop to c4. Like, if he's not careful, he could fall for a trap. So let's see. Pawn to f6. Guys, do not play f6. It exposes the king in so many different directions. Let me get my king. Let me get my king out the center of the board. Because this king is never leaving the center. Knight c6, okay, he developed the knight. Before we do anything, let's just play pawn to h3. A piece is on our half of the board. We have to get rid of it. We take with the queen. I'm assuming he's going to play the move knight to d4, but the knight will be compromised on the d4 square. Which is why he didn't just play knight d4, because once I move the queen, pawn c3 attacks the knight. So he plays knight to e7. With that being said, let's play the move pawn c3 so that we're not worried about any knight going to d4. A part of me also wants to play pawn to d4 and then just burst open the center. Knight a5. We do not put our knights on the edge of the board. Like, whenever you see people put their knight on the edge of the board, don't play moves like bishop b3, because then their knight leaves the edge of the board. We're going to be moving our pieces forward. And that's another disadvantage of him playing pawn to f6. Now my bishop sits on e6. And this king, is just never getting castled anymore because the king can't castle to go to g8 and the king can't castle to go to c8. So he decides to play knight to g6. It is attacking my pawn on f4. Pawn to f5 is a decent move, but because this king is in the center of the board, our goal should be to open the center. So pawn to d4 adds support to my f4 pawn, but I'm also trying to open the center of the board, and I also need to develop my last two minor pieces. He plays pawn to c6. Not sure why, to be honest. I need to develop. I don't want to play knight d2 and then block my f pawn. And then if I take, he's going to take with a d pawn. So let's play knight to a3. We don't want the knights on the edge of the board, but just remember, whenever you put your knight on the edge of the board, it doesn't stay on the edge of the board. You have to move it towards the center. And then he plays pawn to h5. Yeah, this guy's, I don't know what this guy took before he played this game. Kind of embarrassing, but I'm sure pawn to b4 was always a free knight. Like I'm sure at least one or two moves before. The moment he plays c6, pawn b4 was trapping the knight, which means me playing knight to a3 was fine. It was a principled move, but it was definitely a miss because, and this is why you don't put your knights on the edge of the board, guys. Like a knight on the edge of the board, it's just not as mobile. We're 11 moves into the king's gambit. We're already completely winning, but we're also winning a knight. Then he plays queen to e7. The guy's like, hey, you attack my knight, I attack your bishop. How am I going to do this? Pawn to d5 guards the bishop. If he takes, I takes, but then he has knight c6. Pawn to f5 guards the bishop. Yeah, let's go pawn to f5. I didn't necessarily want to play f5 because I wanted to open the f5. I'm expecting him to play knight h4 to attack my queen. But then once I play something like queen to f2 or queen to g3, his knight is going to be under attack. So let's say queen to f2. Now he has two of his knights are under attack, and both of these knights are also trapped. The good thing is he is able to play pawn to g5 and protect his knight. So he didn't find g5, so he decided to sacrifice the knight. That's fine. We're taking the free knight. My bishop is now guarded. His knight on a5 is also trapped. So he's about to lose two knights. Okay, not sure why he moved the king, but let's just grab the free knight. We're currently ahead by two knights. I think he wants to play pawn to g6, which is definitely an interesting move. Because if pawn g6, I mean, I'm able to take on f6. But what if I take on g6? He takes my bishop, thinks he's winning, and then we take on f6, hit the queen. And then once the queen move, we, okay. Hey, what is this guy doing? Pawn a6 did nothing, bro. Okay, let's take on e5. Let's open the position. If he takes with the f pawn, it opens the f file. If he takes with the d pawn, it opens the d file. He took with the f pawn, my fellow viewers, and because his queen and his king is on the same diagonal, we're now able to hit him with what is called pin, bishop to g5, pinning the queen to the king, and now it's just GG's. Because we're already ahead by two knights, and we're about to win the guy's queen. So he decides to sack the queen. Let's just take the free queen. That's a check. So he has to move the king or block the check. He decides to move the king, and now we're just going for mate. Let's play rook to f7 check. Remember, guys, whenever it's time to start attacking, we're putting pieces on the opponent's half of the board. We're looking for forcing moves. And okay, this is checkmate in 1, 2, 3 moves. Hopefully, you're able to find it. But the most forcing move in chess is a check, forcing the king to move to a7. Then we play queen to b6 check, forcing the king to move to b8, and then queen takes b7 is going to be a checkmate. So we check on d8, king has to go here. Okay. Check, king back. That's checkmate in 2. But because I like to be fancy, I'm going to play rook takes g7 check. Also checkmate in 2. Oh, no. Oh, it is, because once he plays king takes, that's just a checkmate. More King's Gambit against 1,400 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,400. More King's Gambit. So e5, we play f4. That's the King's Gambit. Will he accept? Will he decline? He declined the gambit. Let's go knight f3. Let's apply more pressure to that pawn on e5. And then once he applies some defense to the pawn, now we play the move bishop to c4. And then from here, it's just regular development. We're going to castle our king, and we're going to be starting a lot of attack on their f7 pawn, especially if they don't castle their king. Yo, dude played pawn to f6. Never play pawn to f6. Guy's just asking to lose. He's just asking to lose. I'm actually thinking about taking here, but it doesn't really work immediately. You know what? Let's play pawn to d4. Let's open the center of the board. Let's charge in the center of the board. Whenever you see people breaking principles, playing moves like pawn to f6, exposing their king in so many directions, you got to open the center of the board. Knight e7. Okay, he's defending. He's defending. Let's take on e5. Now we're gonna take on e5. How is he gonna recapture? That's the question. Is he gonna take with the f pawn or the d pawn? Oof. Bro took with the f pawn. Knight g5. I like knight g5, but if I play knight g5, pawn d5, I takes, knight takes. Yo, we're going for it because it's also very similar to some fried liver attack stuff. Let's go knight g5. Yeah, this is what happens when you play moves like f6. Because even once I decide to castle my king, my rook is just going to be automatically on the open file. The best he could try here is pawn to d5. But once he plays pawn d5, we're taking that pawn, and it's so similar to the fried liver attack. Oh no, he played queen to d7. It's over. He just lost his queen. Now, if you guys see how white is able to win black's queen, then you have some potential. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by playing the move bishop to f7 check, not knight f7, forcing the king to move to d8. Then we go knight to e6 check. The king will have nowhere to go. The best he could do is sacrifice his queen. We're going to take the queen and we're going to win the game. So let's check on f7. He moves the king. We check on e6. King has no squares. He has to sacrifice his queen. And it moves into the king's gambit. And we're already winning. He took on e6. The knight and the bishop adjacent to each other. It's a 4. Winning even more material. He pulls the bishop back. Let's grab the knight. And from here, it's just a matter of checkmate. He took with the knight. First, let me just get my king out the center of the board. So that way I know that I'm safe. He develops the bishop. Let me develop my knight. And then after this, I'm going to develop my bishop. And then from here, it's just chess. But we're going for the king, though. He's about to get checkmated. Bishop e6 was played. Let's go bishop e3. Again, we're just putting our pieces on good squares, finishing our development first. Okay, that was an unnecessary pawn move. Not sure what that did. But let's play queen to d2. Now the rooks are connected. Once I play rook to d1, every single piece is going to be taking part in the game. King d7, rook d1. Then he plays, okay, bishop to g4 was a strong move. It attacks my rook. Let's just play knight e2 to guard the rook. Eventually, I'm going to play moves like h3 to chase away his bishop. Okay, he moves his rook in the game. Now I'm going to play pawn c4. I'm trying to open the game a bit. He moves the king. Let's play pawn c5. It's a pawn sacrifice, but again, I'm trying to open the game. The more files that is open, the easier it is going to be for me to get to his king. Okay, rook to d8 was played. First, I'm going to take on d6. I mean, if he wants to trade, that's on him. I'm the one who is ahead in material. He took with the rook. Let's move the queen out the way. Very important that I keep my knight on e2 guarded, which means a move like knight to b4 would be interesting. Okay, he found knight takes b4. Okay, what do I do here? That was actually a very nice move. How do we do this? I think it's queen c5. If he takes my rook, I take his bishop. Yeah, let's do that. Let's go queen to c5. If he takes my rook with a discovered attack, I take his bishop. If he takes my knight, I take his knight. Oh, but then he takes my rook. I think I just lost a piece, which is crazy. Okay, he took. That's actually a very strong move. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Let's go queen to a7, threatening queen to a8, and then try to pick up his rook. Because I actually miscalculated there. That was actually a very strong move, especially since both of my rooks are forked. Okay, king to d7. allows me to get out of the fork because I take his rook with check. And then once he took with the bishop, I'm able to play rook to f7 check. Now, I'm only ahead by 2 points, by the way. But once the king moves, g7 is hanging and b7 is hanging. So king to e6, let's grab the free pawn. The plan is to take another free pawn. Okay, rook to f8 is also a nice move. You see, this guy's not playing too bad, because if I take the free pawn on b7, then rook to f8 is actually a checkmate. Mm, 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 mm. So just to be safe, let's just play pawn to h4, which means if he decides to check my king, the king is just running. Knight to d3. This is him trying to bring more pieces in the attack. But the knight on d3 doesn't really do much. With that being said, let's just take on b7. Let's just keep taking more material until he resigns or we mate his king. Knight c5, and this is where he loses. Okay, let's think about it. I'm trying to check on d5 and then win his knight. But then once I check on d5, he's going to play king to f6 and attack my rook, which means if I take his knight, he's going to take my rook. So how do we do this? Let's just take on h7. The knight is still hanging. I'm not necessarily trying to lose this rook because it may assist me in the checkmate. For example, if I check on g5, I don't want his king running back to the 7th rank. And then he plays king to g6. The guy's really trying to take my rook. Okay, what do we... Okay. I thought rook to h6 is winning, but it's not. Worst case scenario, we're just going to take his knight, he takes the rook, take his bishop, he takes, we take, and then we're winning. First, I'm going to play the move rook to h6, check though, forcing him to play king to g7. Same issue though, it's the same issue, but I have a plan. I want you guys to just notice that this bishop is unprotected. So yes, I'm going to be taking his knight, and because I take his knight, we're assuming he's going to take our rook. But the moment he takes the rook, he's going to be putting his king on a square where we're able to hit the king and attack the bishop at the same time. So he took on c5. Let's just take back, applying some pressure. Oh, there was actually rook to f1 check, but he took my rook. Let's take his rook with check. And okay, this is just over. King to h5. Let's play queen to f6. Not only am I guarding the pawn, but he's also getting checkmated on the next move. He fought though. He fought. King g4, and that's just a checkmate. More King's Gambit against 1,500 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,500. Bless you guys with some King's Gambit. Ooh, someone has accepted the Gambit. That's very interesting. Now, whenever they accept the Gambit, we want to play knight f3 or bishop c4, but knight f3 prevents queen to h4 check. Okay, bishop to c5. This is like a major mistake. Pawn to g5 is actually the theoretically correct way to play. After a move like bishop to c5, we just need to play pawn to d4 and attack their bishop. And just like that, we have a massive center. We gain the tempo on the bishop, and we won back our pawn. This is all we need. So he decides to play the move knight to e7, and I think he's asking to lose this game. I think he's asking to lose this game. But let's be patient. Let's be as patient as we possibly can. Let's play the move knight c3. The knight does not belong on g7. Okay, that was his idea. He wanted to put the knight on g6. I was about to set up a great give sacrifice. But this is still weird though, because hear me out. I'm going to put the bishop on g5, knowing that he's going to play f6 and chase away my bishop. But the reason why I'm still going to do it is because the moment he plays f6, he's now exposing this diagonal. And that's where he's going to get his king castled. So now I'm going to pull my bishop back, and then I'm going to finish my development. He castled the king, and look how quickly I'm going to be able to be developed. Bishop to c4. That's called a tempo. So even though I wasted time putting my bishop on g5 and then pulling my bishop back to e3, I just forced him to move his king. And then now once he moves the king, I'm thinking of some crazy stuff, but let's first get our king out the center of the board. Especially since we forced him to move a pawn on the side that his king is on. I'm gonna actually castle my king on the queen side, so that way it's gonna be very easy for me to attack his king on the king side. Bishop to g4. also making it easier for me because okay, my knight is pinned to my rook, but what if I just play the move pawn to h3? Your bishop is under attack. Are you really gonna take my knight, giving up a bishop for a knight, and allowing one of my rooks to get access to this g5? And then he plays bishop to a5. It looks like he's just one of those persons who is afraid of knights and he has PTSD getting knight forks. So he's just getting rid of all the knights. That's not how chess is played, bro. We're going to be starting our attack now. And just something thematic I want you guys to keep in mind. Whenever a knight is on g6 or b6 or b3 or g3, always look for moves like pawn to h4. Because moves like pawn to h4, we're basically trying to attack the opponent's knight, forces the knight away. And then the plan is, God, guys, do not be pushing pawns on the side that your king is on. If you push pawns on the side that your king is on, you're gonna be getting what this guy's about to get. Do not push pawns on the side that your king is on. How do we punish him for this now? Because he just played the move pawn to h5, his knight on g6 is now an unprotected piece. The whole idea was to attack over there anyways. So let's play the move rook to g1, putting my rook on the open file. He's now forced to do something with his knight. Maybe he's going to move the knight out the way. Maybe he's going to defend the knight. Who knows? But the whole entire attack will be along this g file. Okay, okay, he guarded the knight. Fair enough. But watch this. Watch this, my fellow viewers. Queen g2. This is called a battery. Battery basically means more versus less. So he plays king to h7. Now here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm seeing with my genius brain. He has two attackers. I have no, he has two defenders. I have two attackers. So I'm thinking about ways in which I'm able to add more attackers to this knight. I'm thinking about playing the move pawn to e5 and after takes bishop to d3, but then he's able to play pawn to f5. That's the thing. That's the thing. So let's just be patient about the situation and hit him with rook to h3. This is called a rook lift, by the way, my fellow viewers. It's like hacking a file. Well, it's not really hacking a file, but it's just a good way to get the rook in the game. Rook h3 to g3, and I'm going to have what is called an Alekine's gun. Do you know what an Alekine's gun is? It's basically when you have a triple battery. Now he took my knight on c3, and honestly, I honestly don't care about that knight on c3. What if I just play rook to g3 here? What is he gonna do to not immediately just outright lose the game? I don't care about what's happening over here. I'm trying to mate his king. Rook g3. If he takes on h4, that's a check. If he puts the king on h6, that's illegal. If he has to play king h8, we sack the rook and then checkmate him. Rook g6. It's GG's, bro. Because you're losing the knight on the next move. Because I have an Alekine's gun pointing towards your knight. He took on h4, my fellow viewers. Now this is checkmate in 1, 2, 3 moves. Here's how we're going to do it. First, we take on g7 and we're going to say check. King is forced to go to h8. We sacrifice the rook. King has to take, and then that's just going to be a checkmate. So let's take on g7. That's a check. Yo, it's actually crazy. Nobody's surviving the King's Gambit. That's just a checkmate. More King's Gambit against 1,600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,600. Let's do some King's Gambit. So e5, we go f4. Most people play knight c6 or d6 here, not accepting the gambit. So knight c6 was played. And again, what I've been saying, once they defend the pawn, develop the knight, apply more pressure to e5, and then someone finally accepts the gambit. Now, once they take, I like to immediately play pawn to d4. This is the whole idea. They accept the gambit. We charge in the center of the board. We have such a big center. Knight to f6 was played, and now I have options. Do I play pawn to e5, forcing him to move the same piece more than once? Or do I just play knight c3 and stick to principles? Now, if pawn e5, there's definitely knight h5. So let's just play the move knight c3. Let's just stick to principles for a bit. Let's just develop our pieces normally. We want to be able to take this pawn on f4 on the next move. Immediate pawn to d5. Now, I notice that my opponent is trying to open the center of the board. Now, my king is not necessarily out the center of the board, so I'm not necessarily a fan of taking this pawn. So let's just push past Let's just push past now and attack the knight. I'm expecting him to play the move knight to h5 because, usually people want to hold on to the pawn as long as possible, but there's usually no way to just hold on to the pawn. And if they really try to hold on to the pawn, their position is just going to get bad. So he didn't. He played knight e4. And I'm not going to take his knight because then he's going to attack my knight. Let's just take back the pawn on f4. Now we have three pieces developed. The plan from here is to complete my development, get my king up the center of the board as quickly as possible. The the most dangerous move that he could have played is bishop b4, pinning my knight to my king. Bishop g4 didn't really do too much. I mean, it applies some pressure to my knight. If he takes, I should be able to take and attack his knight. If I play the move bishop to d3, however, there's possibilities of him taking on d4. But then if he takes on d4, I take on e4, and he could be in some problems if I'm not wrong. Just to be sure, let's just play the move bishop to b5, develop the bishop, pin his knight. I'm trying to get my king castled as quickly as I possibly can. And if he takes on f3, I don't want to be forced to take with the pawn because I'm also trying to be safe. So pawn bishop to e7 was played. Okay, I'm thinking about playing pawn to h3. There's probably bishop to h4, which could be dangerous. So let me just get my king out the center of the board. So now that I'm sure that I'm safe here, pawn to a6 was played, and taking on c6 is not bad, like, because it doubles up his pawn and everything. But you guys know me. I like the idea of just pulling back to d3. It's the same scenario though. Like if I pull back to d3, what if he plays the move knight takes d4? I'm not going to be able to take. And then if I take on e4, he takes on e4, I take his knight, and then he's just going to take my knight. So with that being said, let's just take on c6. Yes, we're giving up a knight for a bishop. I was kind of forced to do that, to be honest. Now I'm going to play the move pawn to h3. The goal from here is to neutralize any pieces that the opponent has that is on my half of the board. So I'm trying to get rid of this bishop, and I'm also trying to get rid of this knight. Bishop back to h5 was played. Bishops are better than knights. He's holding on to his bishop. Now I'm going to play the move queen to e2, applying more attackers to his knight on e4, and I'm also connecting my rooks. With that being said, my development is complete. Okay, why did this guy just castle his king? Come on, bro. You guy was playing so well. That's crazy. I have two attackers. You have one defender, bro. I'm just gonna take your knight. Like, what did I miss? He takes my knight. I take the pawn, and just like that, I'm ahead by a pawn. It's just crazy. Like sometimes all you need to do is not blunder. Like if you're playing chess and you just not blunder, it's people are just gonna be gifting you stuff. Now I'm attacking his unprotected pawn on c6. Okay, he didn't blunder the pawn, and from here it's just okay. What piece do I have that is not doing anything? Every piece is doing something except this rook on a1. Now, I don't necessarily have an open file except the f file, so I'm just going to swing my rook in the center of the board. I'm not going to lie though, putting the rook on d1 is kind of uncomfortable because of this spin, but there's no way for him to take advantage of the fact that my knight is pinned. He needs to put his rook on the open b file and attack my unprotected pawn. But if he does that, I'm just going to play pawn to b3 and I'm fine. So from here, it's just a matter of converting my advantage into a win. I'm going to be thinking about trading pieces off the board. Like some of you guys do not feel the confidence to trade pieces off the board if you're only ahead by one pawn. But it's not about I don't want to trade because I'm not going to win. It's about building the habit of as soon as I'm ahead in material, I start thinking about trading. Okay, rook to b8 was played. He's putting his rook on the file, attacking my unprotected pawn. Let's play the move pawn to b3, guarding the pawn. I'm thinking of moves like pawn c4, pawn d5. This is important, by the way, guys. I want you to notice how, for one, I've successfully moved every single piece. My king is castled and safe, and there's no really diagonals that is pointing towards my king. If I have to move my pawn to b5 eventually, I may just move my king to h1 to be safe. Now he plays pawn to a5. I'm assuming he wants to play pawn to a4. And I'm thinking about just playing immediate d5, to be honest, just starting my attack. Because after takes, I'm hitting the queen, I'm hitting the pawn. And if queen c6, there's knight d4 hits the queen, and then I'm just going to be the one who is attacking him at that point. And another thing that you guys need to keep in mind is, okay, I wanted to tell you guys about the importance of pawn breaks. This is a pawn break. I've gotten a lot of emails about persons telling me that they're not sure when to do a pawn break. A pawn break basically opens the position. It doesn't necessarily open the position for yourself. It just opens the entire position. So just ensure that whenever you're going to do a pawn break, it benefits your pieces. So queen to e6 was played, and as we said, that's definitely a free pawn. That's definitely not. That's not a free pawn. Why is that not a free pawn? Because there's this diagonal that is pointing towards my king. You see, I tell you guys about this diagonal, especially the fact that you're going to be playing King's Gambit. Don't be falling for these little silly stuff. So because of this diagonal, I'm just going to play the move king to h1, because if I had taken that pawn, I would have had more than one weaknesses in the position. And whenever you have more than one weaknesses in your position, that's when you're going to be getting, that's when the opponent is going to be getting tactics. Queen b6 would have just been a four, checking the king and winning the rook. Now, another weakness that is in my position is the fact that the queen is the only defender of the rook. I'm not going to lose because of this weakness, but it is a weakness. Whenever you're playing, you don't want to have your strong pieces doing defensive role. Like the queen should be an attacking piece. So if he plays a move like bishop to g6 here, then it's actually, what if he plays bishop e6? Notice how my queen guards the rook and I need to keep the pawn on c2 guarded. So then if I play something like, let's say I play queen to c4, he's actually able to, nah, he's not able to sack the bishop. There's knight d4, which forks the queen and the bishop. But so he did it. Let's go. I need to be careful here, because if queen c4, there's actually rook b4. So queen c4, rook b4, and I'm losing. So I have to play queen d4. Again, a weakness, the fact that the queen has to stay guarding the rook. And then all of a sudden, after bishop takes c2, there's no more knight d4. Luckily, I'm able to play rook c1 and hit the bishop, pick up back the pawn on c7. Pawn to h6. Why did he play pawn h? I guess he was uncomfortable about this knight g5. I mean, he's not. It's not like he's losing or anything, but okay. I guess we forgot about the fact that the pawn on a5 was a weakness and that was hanging. Again, I don't care if he takes on c2. There's always rook c1 and then once the bishop move. Well, it's actually a bit tricky. It's a bit tricky. But let's take the if I take, then this rook joins the game, hit my queen. It's kind of risky scenario. Let's just play pawn c4. Let's stay principled for now. The pawn is hanging and it will be hanging. I don't want to take my rook off the file and allow him to get the activity. And then he plays pawn c5 to attack my queen. Okay. Now I have to move the queen. Let's just pull it back to d2. This guy's playing some chess, by the way. I have to be very careful. Bishop to e4 is coming, hits the rook. Rook has to go here. But all my pieces are active. That's the good thing. And my pawn structure is slightly better than his. But he has more time and he has the bishop here. So that's tricky. He also needs to get this rook in the game. He needs to do something with his f8 rook. It's a p4. That's a good move. He's attacking my rook. Like, there's actually rook to d7, bishop c6, rook a7. But I'm strongly considering sacrificing the exchange, to be honest. Like, takes, the queen move, pawn d6, and then he's under attack. That's kind of risky, though. I'm not going to lie, but I'm going to do it. Like, rook d7 seems like the fine move to play. But let's play rook to d1. This is going to be fun because I'm already ahead by a pawn. So if he takes my rook and I take his bishop, he's going to be ahead by 1 point. But then I'm going to be the one with the attack. So let's take his pawn on a5 is not going to be unprotected. But it does not mean I'm winning. I'm in no case see I'm winning this game, but I'm definitely not losing. Queen to b6 was played. He guarded the pawn, and now we play pawn to d5. And this was the whole idea. I'm down by a point, but if he has to put his bishop on d8, his pieces are not active. Now the question is, how do I activate my knight? Yo, do we sacrifice here? Takes, sack even more material? I mean, that's kind of ambitious, but I'm going to have to set it up first. Let's play rook to c1. My idea is after the sack, I want to be able to swing my rook over and checkmate him. So I may also play rook to c4 before I sack. And then when I sack, the rook comes over. Whenever you're attacking, there's a little principle that my coach taught me. He said, for a successful attack to work, you need at least 3 pieces in the attack. You need one of them to sacrifice and then the other 2 to mate. So I'm going to sack the bishop and I'm going to use the queen and the rook to deliver the mate. And the knight on f3 may just be the cherry on top. But it's never going to be possible to bring the knight in the game without thinking about his bishop taking on g5. All of a sudden, my time is now higher than his. He's thinking because my position is so active. He has the extra point, but this rook is not doing anything, and this bishop is not doing anything. Now the queen and the rook is active. Like if I was him, I would try to play something like pawn to a4, and then if I takes, he like swings the queen down and then try to trade. But let's see. Okay, he found pawn to a4, and I was actually thinking of rook c4, and then if he takes, then I sack. But at that point, he may just push the pawn. So let's just take the free pawn that he's giving us. The position is now equal. If queen b2, I could take and then take, but I don't want to trade. So if he plays queen b2, I'm going to play rook c2. And then if he checks, I move my king, and then I'm going to plan to sack on h6. Queen to a5 was played instead, which means I could take the queen. And then once the bishop takes, I take on c5, and then I'm going to be the one who is ahead by a point. But because I don't want to trade, I'm going to play the move queen to e3. Now I have two pieces attacking his c pawn, but secretly, I want to sacrifice on h6. Okay, he took on h4. The issue now is, if I sack on h6, it's going to be hard for me to play rook c4. But I have a little idea. I want to play e6 takes, king over, rook c4. Okay, I'm not sure if that works either. Let's play king h2 first. So that way, once I move my rook, my back rank is safe. Both of us time is also running low, so we have to be very careful here. And he's now ahead by a point. So he took the pawn. If I takes, there's bishop here. Still not able to do this. Rook to c3. Yeah, let's play rook to c3. All I needed to do was to find a way to swing my rook over to the g file. So now I'm definitely going to sack on the next move. So takes, 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 and then I'm going to find a way to get my rook on g3. So he plays rook to c8, which didn't really do much. I mean, he has 40 seconds on the clock. So let's now sacrifice another piece, which is bishop takes h6. And I mean, he may not accept the sacrifice. He immediately accepted the sacrifice. So let's just take on h6. The plan from here is to get my rook to g3. He decides to play pawn to f6. He also wants to just swing his queen back in the defense. So now I need to be careful. And I have less than a minute on the clock. So check king over, check king move, check. Knight here is also an idea. Let's play the move knight h4, continuing with the plan. Once my rook gets to g3, then it has to be game over. He's now ahead by 3 points, by the way. So I'm not necessarily looking to win like a bishop or anything. I'm trying to win his queen. So king to f7 was played, and this is where we're now looking to deliver some mate. So we check here, the king runs. Okay, first let's play rook to e3. I want to play pawn to e6. If he allows me to play pawn to e6, then he's probably mated. King up. Okay, he blundered his rook. Poor guy. That's a rook, bro. Played very well, though. Played very well. But yeah, once the attack comes in, it's over. He took the pawn, and the fact that his queen and his king is on this diagonal, I'm now able to play queen to g8, and that's a skewer. The king move, we grab the queen, and that's game. Okay, now I only have 10 seconds on the clock, so I have to deliver my checkmate, but it wasn't that hard. But more King's Gambit against 1,700 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,700. Let's see what he has against the King's Gambit. E5, we go f4. Is it knight c6? Is it pawn d6? Pawn d6 was played, knight f3. Let's apply some more pressure to that pawn on e5. And then once he plays knight c6, we go bishop c4. This is regular stuff. Oof. Pawn to a6. I think he doesn't want me to play knight g5, but pawn to a6. I'm sure that move is not needed this early. Let me just get my king out the center of the board. Keep in mind, my king is already castled. His king is still in the center of the board. He has to be careful. Okay, so he plays bishop to g4. He's trying to play the move knight to d4, so I have to be a bit careful. So let me start by playing the move pawn to c3 to prevent the knight from going to d4. And you guys should already know that it also comes with ideas of queen to b3, which attacks the pawn on f7 and b7 at the same time. Okay, knight to f6 was played. He's applying some pressure to my pawn on e4. I'm thinking about playing queen to b3, knight a5, I grab. Yeah, let's play queen to b3 here. My knight is no longer pinned. Yes, my pawn is hanging, but is he going to allow me to take on f7 and prevent himself from castling? Or is he going to play something like queen d7 or queen e7? Okay, knight to a5 was played. Very interesting move, by the way, because he's basically forking my queen and my bishop. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm still going to be taking on f7 because it comes with check. Now, his king is forced to move to, let's say, d7 or e7. More than likely, he's going to put his king on e7. Now, once the king move, I'm still forced to move my queen, and I'm going to take the opportunity to play a move like queen to a4. Yes, my bishop is hanging, but his knight is hanging. So if he takes my bishop, I take his knight, and his king will remain unsafe. So he took, let's take his knight. We're already ahead by a pawn, by the way. And okay, my pawn on e5 is hanging, but he's not able to take that pawn because his knight is going to be unprotected. And especially since his king is exposed, he would lose that knight with, let's say, knight takes queen d5, and that's just a fork. So instead, he decides to play the move pawn to b6, which is a smart move. Like, first, he wants to chase away my queen. So let's just play the move queen to a6. I still have some ideas of playing queen c4. The thing is, though, if he takes on e4, queen to c4 check doesn't work due to pawn d5, I think. It's very tricky. I don't think he's going to take on e4. He needs to worry about his king here, and I need to worry about finishing my development. Oh, he took the pawn. That's risky, bro. Because now I'm able to play queen c4, check the king, hit the knight, which means he has to play d5. And then in playing d5, e5 is no longer guarded, so I take with check. And then once he moves the king, I move my queen. That's one option. Or I could just take on e5. Let's just take on e5 because I'm not really seeing any way in which I could win any material. By the way, taking on e5 immediately put my rook on the same line as his king, which means anytime I move my knight, if he's not careful, it's gonna come with check. Which is why he decided to move the king out the way. And now if I check, he's still going to play the move pawn to d5. So I'm thinking of just taking on d6 here. Let's just take on d6. Let's take some more material. Knight takes d6 is the only move, by the way, because, the same queen c4 idea. But once he plays knight d6, I'm going to go pawn d4, and then I'm going to finish my development and enjoy my extra material. So he took with the knight. Now we play pawn to d4. Bishop f4 is an idea. Knight d2 is an idea. Anything that allows me to finish my development, to be honest. King h7, he's trying very hard to ensure that he gets all his pieces in the game. But there's no way for me to punish him right now because I just don't have enough pieces in the attack. So let's finish our development first. Bishop e7, he's trying to get his rook in the game. I think what he's trying to do is castle artificially. Now, queen to d3 will not work due to bishop f5. Knight e5, however, is a nice move because it immediately attacks his unprotected bishop. I have some ideas of playing knight c6, but my next move is more than likely knight d2. Again, I need to finish my development before I do anything. And I want you guys to notice me playing knight e5, you're probably saying it's not principled, but it's like it gives me a tempo. It puts the knight in the center of the board. It didn't really slow me down because he still has to react to this move. And then I'm going to finish my development. So he pulls the bishop all the way back to e6. I wasn't expecting him to put the bishop on e6 though, because the bishop is unprotected on e6. Let's play knight d2. All my pieces are now active. And then once he plays rook to f8, the only piece that I have that is not doing anything is my rook on a1. So let's play the move rook a to e1 and just have a look on all my pieces. Every piece is doing something. Now, in terms of comparing my pieces to his pieces, I would say all his pieces are doing something except this rook on a1. With that being said, I think white has the advantage because not only am I ahead by a pawn, all my pieces are just more active than his, and his bishop on e6 is also unprotected. Okay, rook to f6 was played. I think the guy's listening to me. Now, what were we going to do here? I'm thinking of knight c6, forking the queen and the bishop. And then once the queen takes, I take on e7, and I have the bishop here. And his queen is going to be on the same line as my rook, which means his bishop on e6 is going to be pinned. And I'm going to be able to play pawn to d5, pp on the pp, and win a piece. So let's hit him. Wait, let's just do it. Knight c6. I think he's able to play queen c8, actually. Queen c8, if I take the queen, knight takes. Don't think it works, though. Oh, that's also a nice move. That's also a nice move because if I take his bishop, he could take my bishop. but then the next bishop is going to be hanging. I think we're already winning. I think we're already winning at this point. I tell you about the king's gambit. So he decided to take with the queen. Again, the queen is on the same line as my rook, which means his bishop is pinned and pawn to d5 wins material. Slightly tricky though, slightly tricky, because after pawn d5, there's actually this bishop c8 move. Should be able to play queen d3 check. Let's see. Pawn d5, the best bet for him is to play bishop c8. He gets to move his bishop and counterattack my queen. And if I play queen d3, he blocks with the bishop. Hmm. It's very, very tricky, but I should be able to have a win here. Okay, he found bishop c8. His queen is now under attack. So let's play the move queen to d3 check. The queen is still under attack. Bishop back to f5 is the only move that does not lose. Now I'm trying to see how do we win here. If I take his queen, he takes my queen. If I sack my queen, he takes with the knight. Um, what if I take his knight first? If I take his knight first, he takes my queen. I take his queen. Okay, that's kind of weird. Take the knight first. He takes my queen. I take his queen. He takes my rook. I take his. Okay, um, am I just? I don't think I got anything from it, but it's very interesting. Let's take his knight. I think he has to take my queen. I take his queen. If he takes my rook, I take his rook. It's very tricky. Hopefully, I'm not the one losing at the end. He took my queen. I take his queen. I'm currently ahead by 4 points, but he's able to take my rook. So he took my rook, I took his rook, and then I'm ahead by 4 points. Yeah, I wasn't sure, but it's completely winning. I'm just ahead by a piece at this point. So he plays rook to e8, applying some pressure to my bishop. That's fine. Doesn't really do much. The rook is already guarding it. So I'm just going to use the time to ensure that I don't blunder anything. For example, both of these pawns are unprotected. So I'm just going to play the move pawn to b3. So that way I'm able to play pawn c4, have a very nice pawn chain, and win this endgame. King f7 was played. Let's go pawn c4. Very nice. We're not afraid of anything. And then after he plays king f7, that's where we have to move the bishop. I don't think it matters where I put the bishop. I just need to move the bishop out of the way. I'm not expecting him to trade rooks because he's down by a piece. And if he has to move his rook away, then rook to e7 check is just going to be completely winning. Okay, he's trading. I mean, if I take his bishop, that's a check, but we want to trade. So let's just take his rook. Once we take his rook, and then he takes my rook, that's when I'm going to take his bishop. And I'm just going to be ahead by an entire piece and a pawn in an endgame, which means I'm completely winning. Especially since all his pawns are on dark squares, and in the endgame, the goal is to attack the pawns. This is now just resignable. He moves the pawn. Let's just take the free pawn. And then from here, I'm just going to push the pawns up the board, create a pass pawn, queen the pawn, win the game. Okay, a6, let's go h4. The plan is to play g4, h5, as we said. Well, he resigns. More King's Gambit against 1,800 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,800, and we're going to be teach. Oof, he's playing the fat bear counter gambit, and he played it quickly. It looks like he knows what he's doing. Let's take on d5. Okay, he took on e4. It still doesn't mean that he doesn't know what he's doing, because I think taking on e4 is also one way to do it, because we still have to ensure that we don't allow this queen to h4 check. So I'm going to start by playing the move knight to f3, preventing queen h4. He played immediate knight to f6, and based on what I know, if I play c4, trying to hold on to the pawn, he's more than likely going to play pawn to c6. And we don't want to give him any massive lead in development. Here's what I'm actually going to do. I'm still going to play pawn to c4, but I'm not going to take on c6 if he plays pawn to c6. I'm going to play pawn to d4 and then just focus on my development. Okay, pawn to c6 was played. Let's go pawn to d4. And now I'm just trying to take back the pawn on f4. And then we're just going to be playing a regular game. Bishop to b4 check. Very nice move. And let's just block the check with the knight. And then once he castles his king, it's funny because his king is actually out the center before my king, which means if he castles his king, I'm actually not going to be taking on f4. I'm going to go bishop e2 and then just get my king out the center as quickly as possible. Mm, Okay, this I wasn't expecting. I mean, giving up a bishop for a knight this early on, not sure why. He quickly got his king out the center of the board, but now I'm going to play the move bishop to e2. Because again, we don't want to allow any rook to e1 check. And then I'm going to get my king out the center of the board. So currently the position is equal, but he's going to be taking on d5, and then I'm going to be taking on f4. So he took on d5. Let's just get the king out the center of the board. So everything is now fine. I'm safe. And I could confidently say I have the bishop here. That's all. And because I have the bishop here and I'm white, then I have a slight advantage. Knight to e4 was played. Guy just doesn't want to develop. He's attacking my unprotected pawn on c3 though, so we have to be careful. Which means if I take on f4, he takes on c3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the move queen to c2, just guarding my pawn. Bishop to d3 is also an idea, especially if he wants to go bishop f5, putting his bishop on the same line as my king. And the moment I manage to move my dark squared bishop, my rooks are going to be connected and I'm going to be fine. Okay, so he played rook to e8. I mean, I should be able to take, queen takes. But let's just finally take. Oh, yo, this guy's actually tricky, because if I take on f4, he puts his rook on the same line as my bishop, which means he's threatening to take on c3. And then if I take on c3, there's rook takes e2. With that being said, let's play the move. Is it bishop d3 or do we take? I think it's bishop d3. Applying some pressure to the knight. I'm trying not to lose to any tactics. You could also say I'm threatening to take on d5, but not really, because if I take on d5, queen takes d5, guards the knight. For some reason, he forgets about his light squared bishop and his knight. I'm just trying to take on f4, finish my development, and then start my attack. Oof. Pawn to f5. He's cementing his knight on the d5 square. Now if I take queen takes, uh, it's decent. Let's just take our pawn back. We took back the pawn in f4 finally. The good thing is, okay, he has a very strong knight on e4. We can't take that from him. But his e5 score is weak, so I can put a minor piece on the e5 score whenever I want. But you guys know how principled I am. So this rook on a1 needs to be on some open file. I'm not sure if it's going to be b1 or e1 just yet. It all depends on how the game goes. I also think pawn to f5 kind of weaken his light squared bishop. Who is this guy's chess coach? Because wasn't the queen the only piece that was defending the d5 square, bro? That's a drawback mistake. Even though it has nothing to do with the knight, moving the knight in front of the queen, there's just nothing guarding d5 anymore. So why can't I just take on d5? That's a pawn. And okay, then he plays knight to b6. The thing is though, I'm not the kindest person. I'm not gonna just give him back that pawn. I'm gonna play pawn to c4, holding on to my pawn. And just like that, my fellow viewers, we're ahead by a pawn. We're not giving back this one. Now, again, as I was saying, his light squared bishop is not the best. And once I'm able to get, I'm not sure which one just yet, a knight, maybe a bishop, his knight on e4 is going to be unstable. Or maybe I should just get my rook on the e file. Let's see. Okay, so bishop developed to d7, which means rook to c8 is an idea. Bishop to c4 is also an idea. So we still have to have some level of carefulness. Knight e5 immediately hits the bishop, but rook to e1 is the principled move to play. Rook e1, bishop a4, and I just move the queen. Knight e5, bishop a4, and I just move the queen. So let's just choose the one that gets the pieces in the game. Now, if you look on my pieces, every single piece is doing something. Every piece is also active. I do not have any bad pieces. Personally, if he plays rook to c8, you could say all his pieces are also active, which is what he did. And because his rook is on the same line as my queen, automatically I'm worried about knight takes d5 because my pawn on c4 is going to be pinned. Now I have 1, 2, 3 attackers. He has 2 defenders. So naturally I'm thinking about taking on e4. But if I take on e4, there's not going to be any defense of c4. And he's also trying to take here. So I'm thinking about just moving my pawn to d6. So that way, if the knight goes to d5, then at least it doesn't attack anything. And then eventually I can play pawn to c5. That's one little idea that I have. There's also queen b3, but I'm just so scared of bishop a4, to be honest. All right, this is kind of a scary position, but I'm going to do it. Let's go queen b3. And if bishop a4, I play queen b4. This is just me trying not to give him back the pawn, to be honest. If I'm able to just put my queen on b4 and he's not able to add more attackers to the pawn, then I should be fine. Once I consolidate, I'm going to be winning. Once he manages, or once I manage to play something like pawn c5, okay, bishop a4, let's go queen b4. There's no forks, there's no checks, no good forward moves, which means I'm doing fine. The knight is the only defender of his bishop, which means pawn c4 is kind of like a removing the guard tactic, but not really, because if he takes on d5, my bishop on f4 is unprotected. I like my position though. Like, I think I should just ensure that I don't lose any of my pawns and I should be fine. I should not try to do anything fancy here. Okay. Why did he play pawn a6? Okay. Pawn to c5 hits the knight. Knight takes d5 hits the queen. Bishop c4 pins the knight. But then he moves his bishop and I have nothing. What if I play rook to b1 though? Rook to b1, that means that's two attackers on the knight. This rook isn't really doing anything too important. If I have two attackers on the knight, how is he gonna add defenders? I'm not seeing it, which means he has to move the knight. Oh, he can't move the knight. Because if he moves the knight, then it loses the bishop. Rook to b1 is winning, which means pawn to a6 was actually a drawback mistake because the pawn was doing such an important role guarding the knight. Now it's no longer guarding the knight. Yeah, this is GG's. I mean, guy played decent though. Played decent. Okay, so he decided to sacrifice the knight. So what do I do here? Do I take the bishop because bishops are better than knights, or do I just take the knight and okay, your bishop is still under it? That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take his knight and I'm gonna nah. But if I take the knight, there's pawn. Yes, let's take the knight because once I take the knight, his bishop is still under attack. And if he plays pawn b5, I was actually thinking about playing pawn d6, discovered attack on his king, but rook takes c4 actually wins the game. So if he plays pawn b5, I have to just pull my bishop back to b3. And then he's able to play pawn a5. And then I have to move the queen. I mean, he's going to get a few attacking moves, but at the end of the day, I'm going to be ahead by a piece. Hopefully, I'm not missing anything. Okay, I actually didn't see rook take c4, but I see the idea. He's sacking the rook. So that way, once my queen takes, the queen and the rook is now on the same diagonal, and then he plays bishop back to b5. The thing is, though, I'm ahead by 5 points. I could just naturally move the rook, he takes my rook, and I take back. But all I'm going to do is sacrifice. I'm ahead by 5 points. I'm about to give up 5 points in order to gain 4 points. So I'm going to take his bishop, he takes my rook, I take his pawn, which means I'm still going to be ahead by like 4 points. No, it's just GG's. Because what's the count? He has a rook, I have a rook. He has a knight, I has a knight. He has a queen, I have a queen. I'm just ahead by a bishop and a pawn. Okay, queen to a8, attacking the unprotected pawn. Don't care because his rook is on pre. I think he's also just trying to ensure that this is guarded. All right, pass pawns must be pushed. So let's just roll the pass pawn. There's no checks available on my king. My bishop is unprotected, but there's no way to attack it. And pushing this pass pawn also immediately attack this pawn on f5. Okay, knight to c4. And then that's where he blundered because there's more than one weaknesses in the position. Again, you don't necessarily want to have more than one weaknesses in your position. That's how you're going to be blundering tactics. For example, there's a diagonal pointing towards the guy's king. That's a weakness. There's an unprotected piece. That's a weakness. Hit him with queen to c4. Check the king, hit the knight. King has to move, which means we're winning the game. So he moves the king. We grab the knight. We're now ahead by 7 points. I'm expecting resignation here. Queen takes a7. Okay, let's just roll the pass pawn, hit the rook. And then once he moves his rook to d8, this is actually a very cool idea. Well, I wanted to go queen to a8, but I noticed that bishop to g5 is just completely winning. It's just winning. Because if he takes on d7, again, the rook is unprotected, the back rank is exposed, and queen to c8 is just going to win the rook. If he doesn't move the rook, I'm going to take the rook. And if he keeps the rook on the back rank, I'm just going to queen my pawn. So he pulls the queen back, we take the rook, and then once he plays queen takes, we play queen to c8. And that move is actually winning the queen. Okay, queen to g8. Maybe you could say it helps. I'm not even going to take his queen. I'm going to promote my pawn into a queen. So taking the queen threatens mate, and if he takes my queen, I take, and that's mate. Now he's going to resign. He didn't resign. Hmm. Let's go knight e5. I missed mate, but I'm trying to get a smothered mate. And he allowed it. And that's a smothered checkmate. More King's Gambit against 1900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1900. Hit him with the King's Gambit. Oh, he accept the gambit. Now, there's two ways to do it when they accept the gambit. There's bishop c4, there's knight f3. I'm going to choose to go knight to f3 in this position, just preventing the queen from going to h4. And then my idea is to play pawn to d4, get a very big setup, and then start our attack. Knight c6 was played. First, let's develop our bishop to c4, normal development. And then he decides to play the move pawn to d6, which means this bishop on f8 is already going to have problems developing. Let's play pawn to d4. Now we have two very strong pawns in the center of the board. And as you can see, we're not afraid of losing the f pawn. It's very easy to retrieve. He decides to play the move knight f6 and, okay, knight to g4 already looks strong. If knight g4, pawn d5 takes, knight takes, I'm not able to sacrifice. So that's definitely something. So let's just play principle. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to castle my king. I'm down by a pawn. He's attacking my pawn on e4, but we're playing the king's gambit, so we have to be aggressive. If he dares to take my pawn, I'm just going to play rook to e1, pin his knight to his king, and then start some attack. Yeah, he didn't take the free pawn. Instead, he played bishop to e7. Which is fine. I understand. He's trying to get his king out the center of the board as quickly as possible. Now let's finish our development, developing the knight, guarding the pawn, grab the pawn on f4 next hand. If you guys notice, the position that I'm getting this is literally the traditional way how everyone learned how to develop. You develop the knights, develop the bishops, put the pawn in the center, and then start your attack. I think he's able to play knight takes e4, followed by pawn to d5 in this position. Instead, he decides to play the move bishop to g4, which is decent because it pins my knight to my queen. And he's probably thinking about possible ways in which he could apply pressure to my pinned knight. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play the move queen to d3 so that way my knight is no longer pinned. Eventually, we're going to just get the bishop out of our half of the board. But most importantly, what I'm doing is I'm moving the queen so that way I'm able to connect my rook. Like, this is such a principled game. I developed all my minor pieces. I castled my king and I moved my queen. Now now the rooks are connected. 9 moves into the king's gambit and my rooks are already connected. Okay, I was actually expecting him to play this knight b4 move, and I actually didn't want him to find like the sacrificial ideas. The thing is, his knight on b4 is actually compromised. So once I pull my queen back to d2, my rooks are still connected. Eventually, it's going to be very easy for me to chase his knight out. And if he decides to play a move like knight back to c6, he's the one who is wasting time. Okay, he plays pawn to a5 because he expects me to play pawn a3. So, eventually he's going to pull his knight back. But I mean, I don't necessarily have to chase his knight away right now. I mean, rooks needs files. Let me just swing my rook in the on the e file. It's not necessarily open as yet because my pawn is there, but eventually I'm definitely planning on moving my pawn forward. The move that I'm worried of is knight takes. Knight takes e4 followed by pawn to d5. I guess that's why he played a5. But let's see. If he takes on e4, do we take with the knight or the rook? Okay, that was not it, bro. That was definitely not it. And you know what the funny thing is? This is actually pretty funny. Rook takes f3 seems to look like a normal move, but I'm actually leaning towards pawn takes f3. And you guys probably hear me say don't move pawns on the side that your king is on. But I have the bishop here, and I'm trying to open the g file pointing towards his king. So let's take with the pawn. I'm sure he was not expecting me to take with the pawn. Now he needs to play something like pawn to d5 in order to get some control over the center. But my plan from here is very, very simple. I'm going to move my king to h1. I'm going to move the rook to g1. My king is going to be safe, and his king is going to be under attack. Knight h4 was played, makes a lot of sense. He's trying to attack my bishop. He's trying to get the bishop here. I don't want to pull my bishop back to g3 because the knight is just going to take. So let's just pull the bishop back to e3 here. Okay, bishop to h4 was played. I mean, my rook is under attack. We clearly have to move the rook. But instead of moving the rook to, let's say, d1, I'm going to play rook to e2. Why am I playing rook to e2? Because our plan was already to put the rooks on the g file, which means once I play king h1, rook g1, that's one rook on the file. But once I play rook g2, that's going to be two rooks on the file. And my next move is most likely going to be pawn a3. The reason why I'm not chasing out his knight as yet is because it's not doing anything. Now that he plays pawn to c6, it means he wants to play pawn to d5, which means I'm thinking of just playing pawn to a3 here and just chase away his knight. If he still decides to play pawn to d5, oh, that's actually a decent, yeah, that's actually a decent move. I wasn't expecting him to not move the knight and attack my bishop. I was actually expecting him to move the knight. But let's just pull our bishop back. Let's pull back the bishop, forcing him to move the knight. And then once he moves the knight, the pawn on d5 is going to be attacked one, two, three times. And it's only been guarded once because the knight on b4 was one of the main pieces that's guarding the pawn. And if he plays pawn a4, we're just going to take the free pawn. So he decides to move the knight. We grab the pawn. And just like that, we're already ahead by a pawn. The tactic was called removing the guard, by the way. He took the pawn. Taking with the knight is actually a pretty strong move. But I'm going to choose to take with the bishop because I want to be the one who have the initiative. And when I say initiative, it's basically who is attacking. And my bishop on d5 is attacking his unprotected b7 pawn, which means, well, I was about to say he had to guard it, but he didn't even guard it. He played knight c7, allows me to take because rook to b8 wins back the pawn. So if I take, he plays rook b8, and then once I move my bishop, he plays rook takes b2, and he wins back the pawn. That was actually pretty clever. So we're not going to be going into all of that. Let's just put the bishop on e4. We're going to keep an eye on the unprotected pawn because eventually he has to defend it, and we're going to be pointing pieces towards his king. Okay, knight back to f6 was played, attacking the bishop again. And we really don't want to be giving up our bishops for any knights. So let's just pull the bishop back. There's knight d5. Okay, if I pull the bishop back, there's knight d5. I don't want to give up the bishop for a knight, but I think he's going to get it anyways. So I'm going to allow him to take it so that way I have a big center. With this being said, let's play the move rook to g2. Let's put our rook on the same line as the king. And then if he takes, we take with the pawn, and then the f rook also gets the open file. All my pieces at this point are active, by the way. None of his rooks are doing anything. This bishop on h4, yes, it's on my half of the board, but it's also not doing anything. I'm already thinking about moves like bishop to h6, applying some pressure to his pin g7 pawn, because we know pin pieces don't protect. Okay, rook moves over to e8, which means if I decide to play bishop h6 now, pawn to g6 and e is safe. With that being said, okay, what do we play here? Let's play king to h1. Let's follow the plan. Rook to g1 is an idea. I'm trying to get my queen on the f file, but apparently this bishop on h4 is doing something because it's preventing my queen from getting to f2. Knight e6. I was expecting knight e6, and upon knight e6, I was planning on playing pawn to d5 to chase away the knight. But before we do that, let's play rook to g1. Now we have two pieces attacking his g7 pawn. He only has his knight guarding his g7 pawn. Okay, he plays pawn to g6, which means pawn to d5 does not come with a threat. But now he's weakening the dark squares around his king. So now I'm going to play knight to d5. And then my plan from here is to target some dark squares around this king. Whenever your opponent has dark square weaknesses like this, a very cool plan that we could use is to is to trade their dark squared bishop. And both of my rooks aren't really doing much anymore. I think the rooks done what they needed to do. If I was able to transfer both of my rooks to the f file, that would be perfect. Rook to c8. Okay, rooks needs files. Guys playing some principled chess. Let's play the move rook to f1. Let's put our rook on the f file now. My goal from here is to put more rooks on f2, which means, again, this bishop looks like it's doing something. And then he pulls his knight back to c7. Now, he's trying to trade pieces. There's actually a rule about this. Whenever you're ahead in material, you generally don't want to be trading the pieces off the board. So what I'm going to choose to do is Just play the move knight to b6 and attack his rook, just so that way I'm the one who keeps the initiative because he has to respond to the fact that his rook is under attack. And then once he moves the rook, I now notice that he is attacking my e4 pawn. So I'm going to play the move rook to g4 to guard the pawn, but I'm actually trying to play rook to f4 to apply more pressure to his f7 pawn. He also has less than a minute on the clock, so I'm expecting some blunders pretty soon. Knight e6, I guess he's trying to prevent rook f4, or he's trying to attack my knight. But once I play the move pawn to d5, I attack his knight. I'm also protecting my knight. He moves the knight out the way, and then the whole entire plan that we had was to play the move rook to f4. I'm also noticing that the queen is the only defender of his. Okay, bishop back to g5 has to be a mistake because I have two pieces attacking f7. He has no pieces guarding f7. So let's just take on f7. That's free. He quickly took on e3. I guess the time pressure is now getting to him. Let's just take the bishop. We're now ahead by 2 pawns. Knight to f5 was definitely a good move. Definitely a good move because he's attacking my queen. My pawn on e4 is pinned, and his king is now threatening my rook. What am I going to do? Okay, I'm going to sacrifice the rook. I'm going to sacrifice the rook. And then once he takes with the pawn, it exposes king, and then I'm going to start an attack on his king. Now, this is probably going to be leading to a checkmate. His king is just very exposed. Let's just give a check. Moving the king in the corner is an automatic checkmate, and that's what he did. Now we have checkmate in about 2 moves. I'm going to check on d4. King can't move, so he has to block with something. And then once I take the pieces that he blocked with, then it's just going to be a checkmate. So let's check. He has to block with something. Let's take. He blocks with the queen, and that's just a checkmate. More King's Gambit against 2,000 rated players. Stick around. Opponent is now 2,000. Let's finish off with a bang. Pawn to e4, e5 for the King's Gambit. Let's see what this guy comes up with. Knight c6, we're seeing this a lot. Let's play knight f3. Let's keep applying pressure to the pawn. And if they take the pawn, we immediately play the move pawn to d4. Ooh, pawn to d5. I think this is some sort of gambit, but I don't think he needed to play knight c6. Like, if you're going to play this gambit against the king's gambit, it's best if you play immediate d5. Because now I'm going to take, and assuming he's going to take with the queen, it's just going to allow me to develop my knight with a tempo on his queen. Yeah, and I'm sure that's not what he signed up for. So we already got a tempo. We're playing against someone who is 2,000 rated, so everything is important. He also has to ensure that he keeps his pawn on e5 guarded. So wherever he moves the queen, let's say d6, e6, or c5, those are the square that keeps the pawn guarded. Okay, queen to a5, which means if I take, there's knight takes. But what if I play queen to e2, pin the knight? Oh my lord. And then the next move, I'm just going to apply pressure. With that being said, let's just take the knight, the pawn on e5. That's a free pawn, bro. It's maybe temporarily though, but once I'm able to play, okay, knight e5, this has to be GG's. Come on, bro, you're 2,000. Like, queen e2, this is just pinning the knight, right? I'm already attacking the knight, which means once I play queen e2, the knight is pinned. The issue is there's no way for him to protect the knight. So once he plays bishop to d6, pawn to d4, PP on the PP, and 8 moves into the King's Gambit. We're winning against a 2,000 rated player. Let's go. Bishop to g4. He's developing his bishop. Okay, it pins my knight, but let's not think about it. That's just a free knight. We're ahead by a knight. From here, it's just chess. I'm expecting him to move his bishop. Was this guy 2,000? Because he also blundered his bishop. Maybe he thinks my knight on f3 is pinned, and if I take with the knight, he's gonna take my queen. But what if I take with the queen, bro? You're now down by 2 pieces. That's crazy. Randy has to trade the queens off the board. Okay, let's take. I'm ahead by 2 pieces. 10 moves. into an opening. Like, I can't remember the last opening I've played, and this happens. Now he pulls the bishop back. Mm, he's attacking my pawn. Do I even care about that pawn? Nah, let's just go bishop to c4, applying pressure to his f7 pawn twice. Issue is, how is he gonna defend his f7 pawn? Based on this entire video, I think the 1600 guy played the best. Okay, he took on c2. Let's just take on f7. He's also gonna be losing a rook, by the way. It's just game over at this point. That's crazy though. Like, the thing about the king's gambit is nobody faces it. You know, knight f6. Let's just grab the rook. I'm ahead by 10 points. He castled. I'm not even gonna give him my knight. Let's just pull the knight back out with knight back to f7. Hit the rook, and then I'm gonna develop my bishop, hit his bishop, castle my king, and then it's GG's. Okay, that's a check. We have to be careful. Let's not fall for anything weird now. King f2, knight g4, king g3, and then I'm safe. The guy just does not have enough pieces to start an attack. Like, I don't mind running my king in the center of the board. He literally only has 3 pieces on the board. And then he pin. Well, my knight is not really pinned. So let's just yeah, let's just develop. Let's just develop. Like, no, he has to move the knight. If he allows me to take his knight, I'm gonna take, because we're winning and we want to trade pieces off the board. Knight d7, okay. Again, any trade I get, I'm taking it. Well, I wanted to play bishop to e6, but the guy is pinning my knight to my king. Being pinned is annoying. So let's just get out of the pin first. First, we get out of the pin, then we're going to be bringing more pieces in the game. On h6, hits the bishop. Let's go bishop e7, counter-attacking the rook, because offense is the best defense, and we want him to be the one who's making defensive moves, not us. See, he sacrificed his rook, and then he finally resigned.